first method was long division, which is a process that you'll probably remember better than this one. This one is easier, but it has something you have to memorize, like how to do it. And it is a simplified process for dividing polynomials where all of the variables and exponents are omitted. So you just use the coefficients. Oops. And it's most useful when dividing by a binomial that has a leading coefficient of 1. So like you'll notice that today all of the terms we're using are like a 1x. If it's not a 1 when you do synthetic, you have to do a little bit more work to use synthetic division, and you'll have fractions, which most of you don't like multiplying and adding fractions, which will make it a little bit harder. So that's why this is really useful as like a faster, easier method than using long division when you're dividing by a binomial that has a leading coefficient of 1x. I'm going to give everyone a second to get that copied down. All right, so synthetic division. The first thing you're going to do is you are going to basically find the 0. Okay, using the linear term. So x minus 3 equals 0. X equals 3. Okay. Basically, you're just taking the opposite of that term. All right. Now, we're going to put that term in the top corner, and usually you put a box around it to differentiate it from what we're about to write next to it. What we write after that is we write the coefficients of the dividend. So again, we're omitting the variables and the exponents, so you just write down the terms. It has to be in standard form, so if it were missing a term, you'd have to put a 0 placeholder. Okay? So we would just write 5. Put a little space, -6, little space, 4, and -1. So just listing the coefficients of the cubic function. All right, then leave a little space underneath because we're going to have a second row, but draw like a line as if you were adding or subtracting something downward. All right, now the very first term is going to drop straight down and be itself, okay, 5. Then what you do is you multiply this number by the 0 that's up in the corner. You put that answer underneath the -6. Okay? So 5 times 3 is 15. We write 15 here. We are always going to add downward. You might want to put that in your notes nice and big after you get the number. So -6 plus 15 would be 9. We do the same process. We take 9, we multiply it by the 0, 3, and we bring that answer over here under the 4. 9 times 3 is 27. Again, adding downward, 27 plus 4 will get me 31. Sometimes you will get bigger numbers with the synthetic. And then lastly, we do the same process with 31. 31 times 3 gets me 93. That gets written over here. And we add downward, and we get 92. This last number that you get is your remainder. So usually, we'll put a box around it. So there's a box in the top left corner, there's a box in the bottom right corner, and this is your remainder. Now, what are the 5, the 9, and the 31? Those are the coefficients of your answer. So you just have to work backwards. This would be your constant term. This would be your linear term, and since this is the third one, this would be your quadratic. If you had another one, you'd also have a cubic. So this is really 5x squared plus 9x plus 31. And then remember, we usually do our remainder as plus 92 as a fraction. What goes in the denominator was the divisor, what we divided by. So our x minus 3 from the question up here. And that's your final answer. Okay. This can be done using long division as well if you wanted to do it, like putting all this underneath there and then doing it all. But this does kind of simplify the process so that you don't have to worry about what multiplies to get x squared, x cubed, etc. Just uses the coefficients. Okay. Let's try the next one. Okay, again, you want to find the 0, so you're basically taking the opposite of this symbol. So that would be x equals negative 1. Biggest mistake is that students forget to take the opposite, and then they do synthetic with 1 instead of negative. So we'll start out with that in our top corner. Again, box it to show that it's actually not part of the polynomial we're putting in. That's what we're dividing into. And we'll list out all the coefficients. You do have to put 1. So 1x cubed, 4, 1, negative 6. Leave a little space and then draw your bar down. The first term does not get multiplied by anything. It just always comes straight down. 1. Then you start the process of multiplying and adding, multiplying and adding. So we'll take 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. We put that under the 4. Remember, you are adding, not subtracting. And that's what gets confusing too, because when we did long division, we subtracted the terms. So when you do the synthetic, you are adding downward. So we'll get 3. Follow the same process. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. 1 plus negative 3, negative 2. Multiply negative 2 times negative 1, we get positive 2. Add downward and we'll get negative 4. Remember to box that last part because that is our remainder. Okay, so this would be our constant, our linear, our quadratic, so this must be 1x squared, or x squared, plus 3x, minus 2, minus 4 over, go back up to your linear term, all over x plus 1. How many of you like this better? I thought. Again, you have to memorize the process though. So like in 2 years, if you forget how to do synthetic division, you can always go back to long division if you were to forget the process. But Mr. Curley does use this a lot in pre-calc when you get there. And so does Mrs. Cotton in calc. Alright, so this one is a volume function. So a volume in cubic feet of a shipping carton is given to us by this cubic polynomial. Remember, volume is length times width times height. So they have some sort of rectangular shipping carton, and this is the volume equation. They tell us that the height of the carton is x minus 5. Okay. So basically what they're telling us is that length times width times x minus 5, because that's the height, would equal this polynomial. What they want us to do is find the linear expressions for the other 2 dimensions. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the volume, we're going to divide by the height, which will get me the length times the width. Then I'll be able to factor that to figure out what length is and what width is. Okay? We are going to assume that the length is greater than the width. So when you get the 2 answers, that'll tell you which one's which. If you get 7 and 8, the bigger one will be the length. All right, so let's use synthetic division to take x cubed minus 6x squared plus 3x plus 10 divided by x minus 5. And if this were a question, it doesn't say you have to use synthetic, so you could do long division if this were a quiz or a test question. And I'm going to let you guys try the synthetic on your own this time. You will get a remainder of 0, but take the opposite of the linear term, so that'd be positive 5 in our box. Make sure you put 1s for anything else. Go ahead and see if you can complete the synthetic division for this one. You should get a remainder of 0 if you do it correctly. Okay? All right, so what this is then, Again, make sure that when you actually write the 0 at the end and you box it, that's your remainder, you have no remainder, which means it divides unevenly, which is good. So now we're going to take this, again, we're going to attach our x squared and our x, so we have x squared minus x minus 2. Factor that down into two binomials using our chapter 5 skills. And that's going to give me what the length and width are. Okay? So this would be x minus 2, x plus 1, so that whenever I FOIL it, I get negative 1. And then they want us to assume that the length is greater. So obviously adding 1 to a number versus subtracting 2. Adding 1 would be the bigger one. So we would say that length is going to be x plus 1, and width is going to be x minus 2. Because no matter what you plug in for x, this would be the bigger one. Okay, and then we also had height from before in case you want to jot it down just to have them all here. X minus 5. All right, part B says, if the width of the carton is 4 feet, what are the other two dimensions? So width is 4. It's not telling you x is 4. It's telling you the width is 4. So you would actually take 4 and plug it in for w. Like w equals x minus 2. So we would get 4 equals x minus 2. Add 2 to both sides, we get x is 6. Then we can take 6, plug it back in to find out what the length and the height would be. So the length would be x plus 1, which is 6 plus 1, which would be 7, and that's feet. They already told us the width was 4, and the height, which is x minus 5, would be 6 minus 5, which would be 1 foot. So 7 feet and 1 foot. Now the last one, I'm going to have you guys try this one on your own on the front before we go to the remainder theorem, which is actually really easy. I want you to use synthetic division, but it does say in there, I believe there's one like this on your quiz because I remember marking off points on people's tests last year. It says use synthetic division to divide. Make sure you read the directions. Use your answer to completely factor the polynomial. Okay, so once you get your answer, which will probably be x squared something, you need to factor the x squared into two binomials so that your final answer is like this. Okay, so a lot of students, I just remember on the quiz last year that a lot of students just ended with the synthetic division and didn't completely factor. I bolded, I underlined, I think it had been highlighted it in the directions, but some of you will forget. So please jot that down in your notes so that you remember. So see if you can complete this one on your own if you haven't already. And then use it to factor minus 4x plus 3. Who can tell me what they factored that quadratic down into? What two binomials would multiply to 3 and add to negative 4? Abby?
X minus 1 and x minus 3.
Good. I think this was where I took points off now, remembering. I think some students circled this. Remember, if you were to FOIL this, you're not going to get back to the original equation. So you want to make sure that you bring that other term down with it. Because it says completely factor this whole thing. So that is completely factored into this. If you wanted to, you could FOIL and distribute and make sure you get back to your original question. But it wants this completely factored. They're telling you this is one of the factors. You're just finding the other two. But to completely factor it, you need all three together to get your cubic back. Okay, on the back we're going to learn the remainder theorem. The remainder theorem would really only be useful if you weren't allowed to use a calculator on something. Okay. So the remainder theorem says if you have a polynomial that has a degree greater than 1, so squared, cubic, quartic, whatever, and it is divided by, let's say, x minus 2, where a is a constant, so we're saying a is 2, then the remainder is always going to be p of a, so that would be like p of 2. So remember, f of 2, p of 2, whatever, you're just taking 2 and evaluating it in for each time. So they asked us to use synthetic division to find p of 3. Okay? If you wanted to find p of 3, and if they did not say use synthetic division, all you would have to do is plug in 3, right? Evaluate, you would just plug in. And if you have a calculator, I personally would just type it in my calculator and get my answer. But if you don't have a calculator, you would have to do all the order of operations in your head, 3 to the 4th, 3 to the 3rd times 2, and then all of the math that goes along with it. And sometimes the numbers are significantly larger. So what this theorem is useful for is that if you didn't have a calculator to type this in, okay, you can use synthetic division. Now when you use the remainder theorem and you're finding P of 3, do not change the sign. On the front, we always did. We made it the opposite because we were actually doing linear factors like x minus 3, so we did positive 3. Since they're giving you what the number is, you actually use 3 in your divisor spot. Okay, that's again one other space that I've seen. Now, if we want to divide that into this polynomial, be careful, we are missing a x squared term. So you want to make sure you put a placeholder. If you don't, you will get the wrong answer. You have to have a placeholder for synthetic. So we have 1x to the 4th minus 2x cubed, 0x squared, 1x, and minus 9. Now these numbers are going to be smaller to deal with, potentially, than the other numbers we would get by cubing, multiplying by 2, adding, and subtracting. Our answer to this problem will be what the remainder is. That's why it's called the remainder theorem. Okay. Remember to add downward also. We should get 21. So the remainder tells you what the value of P of 3 is. Again, this would also get you 21 if you were to do it, but the directions had said use synthetic division. If it didn't say that, you could solve it however you want. But this would be useful. You're going to see next week when we start looking at the SAT questions, there's a section of no calculator problems, and some of the numbers they give you are rather large. So this could be something that you might want to use for evaluating if you didn't have a calculator and you didn't want to spend a lot of time doing math off to the side since it's a time test. See if you guys can try the next one, P of -1, using long division. And be careful, this one is missing a term. Which term is it missing? An x. So make sure you put a 0 in. If you don't, the remainder will be wrong.